The silence of the mansion was broken only by the soft hum of the clock ticking in the corner. Eleanor sat by the large window, her once vibrant world reduced to blurry shades of light and shadow. Blindness had stolen the color from her life, but not her spirit. Her heart remained sharp, alert, always listening, always sensing. The world outside was a foreign landscape, but she had learned to navigate it with her other senses: the smell of fresh roses from the garden, the feel of the cool marble underfoot, and the echo of footsteps that betrayed their secrets. She had grown accustomed to living in the darkness. It had been almost 5 years since the accident, when the car crash had taken everything from her: her sight, her independence, her sense of control over her own life. But Eleanor was nothing if not resilient. She'd learned to adapt, to rely on her other senses, to keep going. Her world had shrunk, but her will to survive had only grown stronger. Her husband, David, had been her rock through it all. He had stood by her side in the darkest moments, offering her unwavering support, even though she knew the toll it had taken on him. His patience had been infinite, his love a steady flame that had kept her grounded. But lately, something had changed. Eleanor couldn't explain it, but she could feel it in the way he moved around her, the way he touched her, gently, almost too carefully. As if he were afraid of breaking something fragile, something irreparably shattered. She had tried to ignore it, to focus on the small victories of her daily life, the simple joy of listening to her favorite books on tape, the satisfaction of being able to cook a meal on her own, even the feeling of the sun warming her face when she stepped outside. But nothing could shake the sense of unease that had settled over her. She had noticed the late nights, the whispered phone calls, the sudden absences. But when she asked, David always gave her the same answer: work. But Eleanor knew better. Her intuition, the one thing she still trusted completely, told her that something was wrong. Very wrong. And then there was Claire. Claire had been Eleanor's best friend for years. They had met in college, bonding over their shared love of books and adventure. They had laughed together, cried together, celebrated milestones together. Even after Eleanor lost her sight, Claire had been there, her presence a comforting constant in Eleanor's life. They had grown closer over time, their friendship stronger than ever. Or so Eleanor thought. Lately, though, something had changed with Claire too. She was still there, still texting and calling, but the conversations had become strained. Eleanor had noticed the hesitation in Claire's voice, the subtle pauses before Claire spoke, like she was choosing her words carefully. Eleanor had always trusted her implicitly, but recently, something about Claire's presence felt off. There was a distance, a coldness, that hadn't been there before. Eleanor couldn't put her finger on it, but she could feel the shift. And now, with every passing day, her anxiety only grew. Her world, once built on the foundation of love and trust, was crumbling. Her mind raced with questions, doubts, suspicions. What was going on? Why were David and Claire behaving so strangely? Were they hiding something from her? It was late one evening when the first real crack in her world appeared. David had come home later than usual, his footsteps sounding heavier than normal. Eleanor had been sitting in the living room, waiting for him, as she often did. Her fingers grazed the surface of the furniture as she oriented herself in the room. She was used to this now, the quiet nights spent alone, the hours stretching long and silent as she waited for him to return from work. But tonight was different. There was an edge to his movements, something that set her nerves on edge. She heard him enter the room, his shoes tapping softly against the wooden floor. He didn't say anything, didn't greet her the way he usually did. Eleanor could feel the weight of the silence pressing in around them. Her senses were heightened, every little sound amplified in the stillness of the house. The air felt thick, charged, as if something was about to break. "David," she asked, her voice tentative. "Is everything all right?" There was a pause, a hesitation that felt out of place. Then, finally, he spoke. "Yeah, just tired. I'll go upstairs in a minute." Eleanor frowned. There was something in his tone, something off. She had grown used to reading his moods, to sensing the subtle changes in his voice, but tonight she couldn't place it. It wasn't just fatigue. It was something deeper, something she couldn't put her finger on. David turned to leave the room, but then, as if remembering something, he stopped. "I need to make a call," he said quickly. "I'll be upstairs soon." Eleanor nodded, though her heart skipped a beat. She heard him move toward the study, the familiar sound of his footsteps growing fainter as he walked away. She sat there for a moment, her mind racing. She couldn't explain it, but something inside her told her this was it, this was the moment she had been dreading. The house fell silent again, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She tried to dismiss it, to tell herself she was overreacting, but her gut told her otherwise. She could feel the tension building, a storm on the horizon, and she didn't know how much longer she could ignore it. And then, as if on cue, she heard it. David's voice, muffled through the walls, but unmistakable. He was on the phone. Eleanor couldn't make out the words at first, but the tone was clear. It was the kind of tone he used when he was trying to hide something, when he was being overly cautious. She strained to hear more, her pulse quickening. "Not now." "Not yet," David said in a low voice, his words almost too quiet to catch. But Eleanor heard enough. "Not now. Not yet." The words echoed in her mind, sending a chill down her spine. Who was he talking to? Why the secrecy? Eleanor's mind raced. She couldn't let this go. She had to know what was happening. Her hand reached for her phone, the one tool she had come to rely on to navigate the world around her. She unlocked it quickly, her fingers shaking as she searched for Claire's number. Claire had always been her closest confidant, the one person who had never kept anything from her. But lately, even Claire's presence had begun to feel like a mystery. There was something she wasn't telling Eleanor, and Eleanor had a feeling she was about to find out what it was. She found Claire's number and hit send. The phone rang twice before Claire picked up. Eleanor could hear the faint rustling of paper on the other end, a sign that Claire was distracted. But then, Claire's voice came through, smooth and warm as always, though there was a subtle edge to it. "Eleanor? Is everything okay?" Eleanor hesitated, wondering if she should press her friend for answers. But instead, she decided to keep it simple, to follow her instincts. "I need to see you," she said quietly. "Something's wrong. I need to know the truth." There was a long pause on the other end, and Eleanor could hear Claire's breath catch. "What do you mean?" Claire asked, her voice suddenly tighter. "I don't know," Eleanor replied. "But I have to see you. Meet me in the garden. I need to talk to you." Claire's voice faltered for a second, and Eleanor felt a pang of dread in her chest. "Okay," Claire finally said, her tone reluctant but resigned. "I'll be there in a few minutes." Eleanor hung up, her heart pounding. She didn't know what was about to happen, but she knew one thing for sure, she was on the verge of discovering something that would change her life forever. As she stood up, she could hear David's footsteps moving upstairs. She felt a deep sense of foreboding settle over her, but she couldn't turn back now. She had to know the truth. She had to face whatever darkness was lurking in her world. The garden was her sanctuary, a place where she had once found peace. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it felt like the calm before a storm. As Eleanor stepped into the cool night air, she felt her heart race. The moment of truth was coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. Eleanor stepped into the garden, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was cool, the scent of jasmine and roses still lingering from earlier in the day. She could feel the softness of the grass beneath her bare feet, each step a gentle brush against the earth. It was her sanctuary, the place where she had always found solace and peace, a place where the world outside could not touch her. But tonight, it felt like a foreign land, a place full of shadows and secrets. She knew Claire would be there soon. The call had been brief, the promise of answers clear, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something she wouldn't be able to walk away from. What had she gotten herself into? Why had David been acting so strangely? Why had Claire, her best friend, been avoiding her? The questions spiraled in her mind, each one more urgent than the last. Eleanor stopped in the middle of the garden, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the wrought iron bench where she and Claire had once sat for hours, talking about life, about love, about dreams. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Back then, their biggest worries had been trivial: school, work, relationships. Now, it felt like the world was crumbling around her. The soft rustling of leaves caught her attention. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She stood still, listening intently. The faint sound of footsteps echoed through the garden, growing louder as they approached. Claire. Eleanor could feel her stomach twist. This was it. The moment that would change everything. Claire had always been the one to comfort her, to listen when no one else would. But tonight, there was an unfamiliar coldness in her tone, a tension in her voice that Eleanor couldn't ignore. Why was Claire acting this way? What was she hiding? The footsteps stopped just behind her, and Eleanor turned, her breath catching in her throat. Claire stood a few feet away, her figure a silhouette against the moonlit sky. Eleanor could hear her breathing, a soft, shallow sound. But it was more than that, it was the way she stood, stiff and uncertain, as if she wasn't sure whether to approach or stay distant. Claire. Eleanor's voice was steady, though her heart was racing. What's going on? Why are you avoiding me? And why is David acting so strange? I need to know the truth. Claire didn't answer right away. For a long moment, the only sound in the garden was the distant hum of crickets. Eleanor could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. She wanted to reach out, to hold on to her friend, to make everything right again, but something held her back. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something else. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor, I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Tell me what? What's going on? Claire took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say the words that had been weighing on her. It's David. He's been seeing someone else. Someone you know. Eleanor felt as if the ground beneath her feet had been ripped away. Her stomach churned, her mind spinning. She couldn't breathe. The words Claire had just spoken didn't make sense. David? The man she had loved, the man who had been by her side through everything? The man who had promised to always be there for her? How could he do this to her? For a moment, Eleanor was paralyzed, the shock of the revelation too much to bear. But then, something inside her snapped. She refused to let this be the end of her story. She couldn't be a victim, not again. She had fought so hard to rebuild her life after the accident, to find some semblance of peace in the darkness. She wouldn't let David, or anyone, tear it all down. Who is it? Eleanor's voice was sharp, each word a challenge. Who is he seeing? Claire hesitated again, her eyes darting to the ground. It's me, she whispered. It's me, Eleanor. The world tilted. Eleanor's legs felt weak, and she reached out, grabbing the back of the bench to steady herself. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. She had heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Claire, her best friend, the person she had trusted more than anyone, had been sleeping with her husband? Eleanor turned toward Claire, her hands trembling. She couldn't speak. The shock, the betrayal, the utter disbelief coursed through her veins. She felt as if she were drowning in the weight of it all. Why? Eleanor finally managed to ask, her voice cracking. Why would you do this to me? Claire looked pained, her face pale under the moonlight. I never meant for it to happen, Eleanor. I swear. It just happened. We were both there for each other when you were going through the hardest part of your life, and somewhere along the way, we both lost ourselves. Eleanor's mind raced, but it was hard to think through the fog of betrayal that clouded her thoughts. She had been blind to so many things, the warning signs, the small cracks in her marriage, the distance between her and David. But Claire? Her best friend? She had always thought they shared everything, that no secret could come between them. And yet, this had been happening behind her back. For how long? Weeks? Months? Why didn't you tell me? Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you hide this from me? Why didn't you stop? Claire's eyes filled with tears. I was afraid, Eleanor. I was afraid of losing you, of you hating me. I never meant to hurt you. But it was already too late. The feelings had already taken root, and I couldn't stop it. And David, he didn't know how to tell you either. The words felt like daggers to Eleanor's heart. It was the truth she had feared, the secret she had been unwilling to confront. But hearing it from Claire's lips made it feel real, painfully, devastatingly real. Eleanor stumbled backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to endure. But now, she felt broken. Crushed under the weight of the betrayal from both the man she loved and the woman she trusted most. It was too much. She couldn't process it. Not all at once. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice shaking. I don't know what to do. Claire took a tentative step forward, but Eleanor held up her hand, stopping her. No, Eleanor said softly. I need to be alone. Claire nodded, her face a mask of guilt and regret. Without another word. She turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing in the garden, surrounded by the shadows of the night. The air felt thick, suffocating. Eleanor could feel the tears threatening to fall, but she refused to let them. She wasn't going to cry. Not yet. She had always been strong, always found a way to survive. And this? This was just another obstacle she had to face. Another challenge she had to overcome. But the pain was real. The betrayal was real. And for the first time in years, Eleanor felt lost, truly lost. The life she had known, the world she had built, had shattered in an instant. As the moonlight bathed the garden in a soft glow, Eleanor took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She couldn't undo what had happened. She couldn't change the past. But she could choose what to do next. She could choose to rise from the ashes, to find a way forward, even if she had to do it alone. The road ahead would be hard. But Eleanor had never been afraid of a challenge. And this time, she would fight for her future. No matter what it took. The garden felt suffocating. Eleanor stood motionless, the cool night air grazing her skin, but it offered no comfort. The whispers of the garden, once soothing and familiar, had turned into echoes of a life she no longer recognized. The secrets, the lies, and the betrayal had shattered her world. Claire was gone now, leaving behind only silence, but the weight of her words lingered in the air like a heavy fog. David. Eleanor didn't know how long she stood there, frozen. The moonlight bathed the garden in an eerie glow, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across her heart, dark and endless. How had everything changed so quickly? Just days ago, she had been living in a world she thought she understood, full of love and trust, even in the face of her blindness. But now, it felt like that world had crumbled, leaving her standing in the ruins, unsure of who to trust or what to believe. The sharp sound of a door opening broke through her thoughts. Eleanor tensed, her body stiffening instinctively. She turned her head, listening intently. She could hear the faint creak of wood and the soft, hesitant footsteps on the gravel path. It was David. She knew it. The rhythm of his steps, the way his shoes pressed into the ground with a slight drag, was unmistakable. Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what she was feeling. Anger? Betrayal? A deep sense of loss? It was all of them, a jumbled mess that churned inside her. Her hand gripped the iron bench, and she closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. Her mind screamed at her to confront him, to demand answers, but a part of her, perhaps the same part that had once trusted him with everything, was terrified of hearing more of the truth. She felt David's presence before she heard him speak. The subtle shift in the air, the familiar scent of his cologne, and the warmth of his breath against her skin. "Eleanor," his voice was quiet, almost too gentle, like a man approaching a fragile piece of glass. "We need to talk." She turned slowly toward him, her hands still gripping the bench. Her stomach twisted in knots, but she forced herself to look at him. She wasn't sure if it was out of courage or sheer determination, but she couldn't look away. Not now. Not when everything she had known was slipping through her fingers. "I don't know what to say to you," Eleanor said, her voice shaky but firm. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "I thought I knew you, David. I thought I trusted you. But now, I don't know who you are." David's silence was deafening. He didn't move, didn't speak. Eleanor could hear him breathing, hear the hesitation in his chest. She could feel him struggling, trying to find the right words, but there was nothing that could erase what had already been said, nothing that could undo the damage. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he said finally, his voice tight with guilt. "It was a mistake. A horrible mistake. But I love you, Eleanor. I've always loved you." Eleanor scoffed, the bitterness rising in her throat. "Love? Is that what this is? Love? You've been lying to me, to both of us, for who knows how long. You didn't just make a mistake, David. You made a choice. You chose her. You chose Claire." David flinched at the mention of Claire's name, and for a brief moment, Eleanor saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough. "I didn't want to hurt you," David continued, his voice breaking. "I don't know what happened between us, but I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me. This thing with Claire, it was a moment of weakness. It wasn't supposed to go this far." "A moment of weakness?" Eleanor repeated, her voice rising with incredulity. "You think this was just a mistake? A brief lapse in judgment? How many times did you think of me when you were with her? How many nights did you lie to my face, pretending everything was fine while you were betraying me?" David took a step forward, his voice urgent. "Eleanor, please. I'm sorry. I've made a terrible mistake. But I love you. I don't want to lose you." Eleanor took a step back, shaking her head. Her heart was a battlefield, torn between the man she had loved and the truth that had shattered everything. "How can I believe you? How can I trust you again, after everything you've done? How do you expect me to forgive you?" David opened his mouth to speak, but Eleanor raised her hand, stopping him. She couldn't bear to hear any more of his excuses, his attempts to justify what he had done. He had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and no amount of pleading would change that. "I don't want to hear it," Eleanor said quietly, the words like lead in her mouth. "I don't want to hear your apologies, your explanations. They mean nothing now." David's face crumpled in sorrow, and for a moment, Eleanor almost felt pity for him. But the pity was fleeting, replaced by a cold anger that she couldn't shake. She had been living in a lie for so long. Now, the truth was all she had left. "Where is she?" Eleanor asked, her voice hard. "Where is Claire?" David didn't answer immediately. He stood there, looking at her, his expression a mix of guilt and confusion. "She left. She was just as confused as I am. We both made mistakes. But it's over now. Please, Eleanor. Let's try to fix this." Eleanor shook her head, feeling a sense of finality wash over her. It's not over. It's over for me. David's face drained of color. What are you saying? I'm saying that I can't stay here, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. I can't live in this house anymore, not with you, not with the lies. I need to find myself again. I need to rebuild my life. David's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked as if he had been slapped, his eyes wide with shock. Eleanor, please. But Eleanor wasn't listening anymore. She turned away from him, her heart heavy, but resolute. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the fact that everything she had once believed in had been ripped apart in an instant. And the worst part was that she had known, deep down, that something wasn't right. She had ignored the signs, convinced herself that the love she shared with David was enough to overcome any obstacle. But now, she had to face the truth. Her life, as she knew it, was gone. And though the pain of this moment was unbearable, she couldn't allow herself to stay in the wreckage. She had to leave. For herself. I'm leaving, Eleanor said softly, more to herself than to David. I don't know what the future holds, but I can't stay here anymore. I need to find a way forward, even if it's on my own. David's eyes were filled with tears, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She had seen enough. She had heard enough. The trust she had placed in him was shattered, and no apology would fix it. She walked past him, her steps slow but determined. As she reached the door, she paused for just a moment, her hand on the handle. Goodbye, David. And then, without another word, she stepped outside into the night. The cool air wrapped around her like a cloak, the chill of the evening offering a strange sense of clarity. The garden she had once loved no longer held any comfort. The house, once filled with the warmth of their shared life, now felt like a prison. Eleanor didn't know where she was going. But she knew she couldn't stay. Not now. Not after everything. The road ahead was uncertain. It was dark, and the path was unfamiliar. But for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt like she had a choice. She could rebuild. She could survive. And this time, she would do it on her terms. As she walked away from the mansion, her heart heavy but her resolve stronger than ever, Eleanor knew that the hardest part was just beginning. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was finally free. The days following Eleanor's departure were a blur. She hadn't known what to expect, hadn't known where she was headed, but somehow, the streets were easier to navigate than the turmoil in her mind. The world outside her marriage had been distant, unfamiliar, she hadn't had the energy to face it. But now, with her heart in pieces, Eleanor was forced to find a way to put herself back together. She spent the first few days in a small hotel in the city, far enough from her old life to breathe, but close enough that the memories were just a whisper away. The city felt alive around her, bustling with people, cars, and endless noise. It should have been overwhelming, but for Eleanor, it was strangely comforting. The chaos outside mirrored the turmoil inside, and in some odd way, it made her feel less alone. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and the few belongings she'd packed into a small suitcase, but it felt like freedom. A kind of freedom she hadn't known in years. Each day felt like a test, each step an effort to move forward. Her hands trembled at times, especially when she was alone in her hotel room. She would sit on the edge of the bed, the silence of the room pressing in on her, and allow herself to break down, just for a moment. It was easier to cry in the quiet, to let the rawness of the pain pour out. But only for a moment. Then she would wipe her tears away, take a deep breath, and force herself to go on. To survive. Eleanor knew she couldn't stay in the hotel forever. She needed to find something more permanent, a place to call her own. But finding a new home felt like an insurmountable challenge. She couldn't stay in the city for long. Too many memories. The thought of seeing familiar places, knowing David might pass by at any moment, made her skin crawl. The next morning, Eleanor packed up her things and left the hotel behind. She hadn't decided where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay in that room, feeling the weight of all her decisions hanging over her. She had to find a way to create a new life, one that didn't involve David, or Claire, or anyone else from her old life. Eleanor spent the next several days in a daze, wandering the streets, seeking answers she wasn't sure she was ready for. She found a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, tucked away on a quiet street, and for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of peace. She ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the world outside. The cafe wasn't fancy, but there was something about it that felt right, simple, understated, but warm. Eleanor had never been one for grand gestures, for opulent displays of wealth. She had always preferred the quiet comfort of smaller things, the simplicity of a well-made cup of coffee or the peaceful sound of rain tapping against the windowpane. As she sipped her drink, she allowed herself to relax. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let her guard down. The pain was still there, gnawing at her from the inside, but it was quieter now. The noise of the city, the people around her, distracted her from the gnawing emptiness she had been carrying. "Excuse me, miss," a voice interrupted her thoughts, pulling her back to reality. Eleanor looked up to see a man standing by her table, a kind smile on his face. He looked a few years older than her, with dark hair and warm eyes that seemed to hold a depth of understanding. He was holding a cup of coffee in his hand, as if he had been about to sit down, but had hesitated when he saw her. "Sorry to bother you," he said, "but you look like you've been through a rough time. Are you okay?" Eleanor blinked, caught off guard by his sudden approach. She wasn't used to people speaking to her so directly, especially strangers. But there was something about his presence, calm and unassuming, that made her feel, for the first time in days, as if someone genuinely cared. "I'm fine," Eleanor said, giving him a small, tired smile. "Just thinking." The man nodded, his expression softening. "I know how that goes," he said quietly. "Sometimes, the best thing to do is just sit and let your mind wander. Let the world be for a while." Eleanor studied him, trying to assess whether this was some sort of strange encounter or a genuine offer of kindness. He didn't seem threatening or pushy. In fact, he seemed more like someone who had been there, someone who understood. "My name's Daniel," he said, extending his hand. "I come here often. I've seen you around, sitting by the window, and I thought I'd say hello. You seem like you could use someone to talk to." Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then shook his hand. "Eleanor." Daniel smiled, his eyes lighting up with a warmth that seemed to ease some of the tension in her chest. "Nice to meet you, Eleanor. If you ever want someone to talk to, I'm here." She didn't know why, but something about Daniel made her feel safe, even if only for a moment. She wasn't ready to open up to him completely, but his presence felt like a small anchor in the vast sea of uncertainty she had been drifting in since leaving David. "I'm not sure I have much to say," Eleanor replied, forcing a faint laugh. "I've been keeping to myself." Daniel nodded, his gaze understanding. "I get it. But sometimes, sharing a little can make all the difference. Even if it's just talking about the weather or your favorite book. You'd be surprised how small things can make us feel a little less alone." Eleanor smiled faintly, appreciating the sentiment. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her like this, without judgment, without expectations. She realized that in her isolation, she had shut herself off from the world, pushing away the very things that might help her heal. She had been hiding from the world in her own way. "I'll keep that in mind," she said softly. The conversation drifted naturally from there, moving to small talk and then to deeper topics. Books, films, places they'd each been, their favorite foods. Daniel didn't push, didn't ask too many questions about her past. It was refreshing, and for the first time in days, Eleanor found herself laughing at something he said. After a while, Daniel stood up to leave, his coffee finished. It was really nice talking to you, Eleanor. Don't hesitate to come by again. I'll be here. Eleanor nodded, offering a small smile. Thank you. For everything. As he walked away, Eleanor watched him go, a strange sense of peace settling over her. She wasn't sure why, but something about Daniel's kindness had made her feel a little less like a victim and more like a person again. For the first time since she left David, Eleanor felt like she was slowly finding her way back to herself. The days after that encounter were a blur of quiet reflection. Eleanor spent her mornings at the cafe, reading books she hadn't touched in years, and her afternoons walking through the city, exploring streets she had never taken time to see before. There was a strange freedom in it. The city was vast, and yet it was hers to explore, unencumbered by the weight of her past. But even as she began to breathe again, she couldn't escape the knowledge that the life she had known was gone. Her marriage was over, her best friend had betrayed her, and the future was uncertain. She could never go back to who she was before. But perhaps, just perhaps, she could build something new. Something better. Eleanor didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she had a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was hers to walk. And maybe, just maybe, there was a future out there that didn't involve the shadows of betrayal. The mornings in the city had begun to feel different. Eleanor still spent her days walking the streets, finding solace in the rhythm of the world around her. Her body had become accustomed to the constant hum of activity, the sound of cars whizzing by, the chatter of people in the cafes, and the soft rustle of leaves in the parks. At first, it had all seemed overwhelming, but now, she felt at home in the chaos. It was a reflection of what her life had become, constantly shifting, never certain, but she was learning to adapt. The cafe where she'd met Daniel had become a regular spot. Every morning, she would find herself at the same corner table by the window, watching the world as she sipped her coffee. The warm, earthy smell of freshly ground beans mixed with the soft hum of conversation, and Eleanor couldn't help but feel at peace. The cafe felt like an anchor, a constant in the midst of all the changes she had endured. And there, sitting at that table, she had begun to find herself again. The healing was slow, but it was happening. Each day, she allowed herself to feel, to process, to be present in the moment. She didn't push away the pain anymore, but rather let it flow through her, like a river that needed to find its course. She had learned to sit with it without drowning in it. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was suffocating. One morning, as the sun peeked over the skyline, Eleanor was startled by the sound of footsteps approaching her table. She looked up to see Daniel walking toward her, a slight smile on his face, as always. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee, one in each hand. "I thought I'd join you today," he said, his voice light, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "If you don't mind, of course." Eleanor smiled, her heart doing a strange flip. "I don't mind at all," she replied, moving aside to make space for him. Daniel set down the cups, took a seat across from her, and sighed contentedly as he took a sip of his coffee. "I'm glad to see you're still coming here. I was beginning to think I was the only one who appreciated the charm of this place." Eleanor chuckled softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I think it's one of those hidden gems. You almost feel like you're part of something secret by being here." Daniel nodded, his eyes gleaming with understanding. "Exactly. It's like finding a little slice of peace in the middle of a busy city." For a moment, they simply sat in comfortable silence, both of them taking in the surroundings. The day had just begun, but there was something calming about the way the light filtered through the windows, casting soft shadows across the tables. The world outside the cafe moved at a rapid pace, but here, inside, it felt as though time had slowed down. Eleanor found herself appreciating these quiet moments more and more. They gave her the space to think, to reflect on her life and where it was going. She had spent so many years caught up in the whirlwind of her marriage, of the expectations of others, that she hadn't taken the time to listen to herself. But now, in these moments of stillness, she was starting to understand who she was beyond the labels of wife and friend. "How have you been?" Daniel asked, his voice gentle, his gaze steady. The question caught Eleanor off guard, as though she hadn't realized she was being asked about herself in a way that was personal, no longer about her past or her pain, but about her present. "I'm getting there," she replied, taking a deep breath. "I've been taking it one day at a time." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that. Healing isn't a straight line, you know. It's more like a winding road with a lot of unexpected turns." Eleanor's lips curved upward at the analogy. It was a simple truth, but one that had never quite hit home until now. She had been so fixated on the idea of fixing herself, of rushing through the process of healing, that she hadn't stopped to realize that sometimes, the process itself was the most important part. As the conversation drifted on, Eleanor found herself opening up more than she had in weeks. She talked about her old life, the things she missed, the things she didn't. She spoke of the confusion and betrayal that had left her shattered, but also of the quiet strength she had discovered in herself during the weeks since leaving David. Daniel listened intently, never interrupting, just offering the occasional nod of understanding. And though she hadn't planned on it, Eleanor found herself talking about David. Not with anger or bitterness, but with a sense of sadness that lingered in her voice. "I don't think I'll ever be able to forget what happened," she said softly. "But I also don't want to keep carrying the weight of it. It's just too much." Daniel's eyes softened, and he leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to carry it alone. And you don't have to carry it forever. What happened isn't your fault. And though it might take time, I believe you'll find a way to let it go. To let him go." Eleanor met his gaze, feeling a strange warmth spread through her chest. The words were simple, but they hit deeper than she expected. She had been so focused on holding on to the pain, on keeping it as a part of her identity, that she hadn't considered the possibility of truly letting it go. As the conversation continued, Eleanor realized that in Daniel's presence, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not hope for a return to what she had lost, but hope for something new. Something real. The next few days passed in a blur. Eleanor found herself visiting the cafe more often, and with each visit, her connection to Daniel grew. She wasn't sure what it meant, or even if she was ready for anything beyond friendship, but there was something undeniably comforting about his presence. He had become a safe space in her otherwise uncertain world. But the healing process wasn't without its hurdles. There were moments, often late at night when the city was quiet and her thoughts became louder, when the weight of her past would come crashing down on her. She would think about Claire, about the way her best friend had betrayed her, and the anger would rise up again, fierce and unrelenting. One night, after a particularly difficult evening, Eleanor found herself standing on the balcony of her small apartment, looking out over the city below. The light stretched out before her like a sea of stars, and for a moment, she felt small, insignificant against the vastness of the world. But she wasn't alone. She had come this far, had survived the betrayal, the heartbreak. And she was starting to realize that she didn't need to be defined by the past anymore. The past had happened, but it didn't have to control her. A soft knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. Eleanor turned, surprised to see Daniel standing in the doorway, his face etched with concern. "You okay?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with genuine care. Eleanor smiled weakly. "Yeah, I think so. Just thinking." Daniel stepped inside, not waiting for an invitation. He crossed the room and stood beside her, looking out over the city with her. They didn't speak for a long while. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding, as if they didn't need words to communicate. After a long pause, Daniel finally spoke. "You're stronger than you think, Eleanor. I can see it in the way you're handling everything." Eleanor's heart fluttered at his words. She didn't know what it was about him, his kindness, his unwavering presence, but it made her feel safe. Safe enough to admit things she had never told anyone before. I don't know if I feel strong, she whispered, her voice breaking. Some days, I just feel so lost. Daniel turned toward her, his eyes full of understanding. He reached out, gently placing his hand over hers, a simple touch that conveyed more than words ever could. You don't have to have everything figured out right now, he said softly. Just take it one step at a time. You'll find your way. I believe in you. Eleanor looked into his eyes, her heart swelling with gratitude. He wasn't just a friend. He was someone who truly saw her, not the woman who had been betrayed, but the woman who had survived it and was slowly learning to rebuild her life. And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor believed in herself too. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, staring out the window at the bustling streets below. It had been months since she had walked away from the wreckage of her old life, and yet, the shadow of betrayal still loomed over her like a dark cloud. She had come so far in her healing process, so much further than she had ever thought possible, but there were still days when the weight of what had happened seemed unbearable. The wound left by David's infidelity and Claire's betrayal hadn't healed, it had only scarred over. The scars would remain, but the question was whether she could learn to live with them. Her apartment was small, but it was hers, her sanctuary in the middle of the city. A place where she could finally breathe, where she could exist without constantly looking over her shoulder or feeling the suffocating weight of others' expectations. But there was still something missing. Something that lingered in the back of her mind, a nagging thought that refused to be ignored. Daniel. The thought of him both comforted and unnerved her. In the months since their first meeting, Daniel had been a steady presence in her life. He had never pushed her, never asked for anything she wasn't ready to give. They had spent hours talking about life, about love, about loss. There had been laughter and tears, quiet moments of shared understanding. But it wasn't just his kindness that had drawn Eleanor in. It was something deeper, something she couldn't put into words. A connection that felt as though it had always existed, even before they had met. But with that connection came fear. Fear that she wasn't ready for anything more. Fear that the scars from her past would never let her move forward, that she would always be haunted by the ghosts of David and Claire. The knock on the door broke her from her thoughts. She didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. She'd been expecting him. Eleanor? Daniel's voice came through the door, soft but insistent. She stood slowly, walking toward the door with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. When she opened it, Daniel stood there, a familiar warmth in his eyes and a slight smile on his lips. "Hey," he said gently. "Can we talk?" Eleanor nodded, stepping aside to let him in. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she had missed the sound of his voice, the comfort of his presence. He had become so much more than just a friend, he had become the person she turned to when the weight of everything else became too much to bear. "Of course," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat on the couch, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. Daniel reached for her hand, a simple gesture that sent a jolt of warmth through her. His touch was steady, grounding, and for a moment, Eleanor allowed herself to lean into it. "Is everything okay?" he asked after a few beats, his gaze searching hers. Eleanor took a deep breath, her chest tightening with emotion. "I don't know," she admitted. "I feel like I'm stuck. Like I've come so far, but there's something. I don't know, unfinished." Daniel's expression softened, and he squeezed her hand gently. "I understand. You've been through so much. You've been carrying this burden alone for so long. But you don't have to do it by yourself anymore." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "It's not just that. It's that I don't know if I can ever truly let go of what happened. Of David. Of Claire. I don't know how to forgive them. How to move on." Daniel nodded, his eyes filled with empathy. Forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's not about excusing what they did. It's about freeing yourself from the anger, the resentment, the pain that keeps you trapped in the past. You're not doing it for them, Eleanor. You're doing it for you. Eleanor swallowed hard, trying to process his words. It wasn't that she didn't understand the concept of forgiveness, it was that the idea of letting go of the anger, the betrayal, felt impossible. She had spent so much time hating David, blaming Claire, that she didn't know how to stop. "Do you really think I can forgive them?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel looked at her with a depth of sincerity that made her heart ache. "I think you can. But it has to come from you. It has to be your decision, and it's not something that happens overnight. It takes time. But I believe you can do it. I believe in you." Eleanor stared at him, the weight of his words settling deep inside her. She had never realized how much she had been holding on to the anger, the hurt, until this moment. It had become a part of her, woven into the fabric of who she was. She had used it to shield herself from the pain, to protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. But it had also kept her locked in a cycle of resentment, unable to move forward. "What if I'm not strong enough?" she whispered. Daniel leaned closer, his voice soft but firm. "You are. You've already come so far. You've survived everything that was meant to break you. You're stronger than you think." Eleanor felt the tears well up again, but this time, she didn't try to stop them. She let the tears fall freely, each one a release, a small step toward healing. She had been holding on to so much, anger, sadness, fear, and for the first time, she felt like it was okay to let it go. It was okay to feel the pain, to acknowledge it, and then to release it. "I don't know what to do next," she said, her voice shaky. "You take it one step at a time," Daniel said, his hand still holding hers. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take the next step. And when you're ready, I'll be here. To help you, to listen, to support you." Eleanor looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. He wasn't asking for anything from her. He was simply offering his support, his friendship, his presence. And that was enough. It was more than enough. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm scared that I'll never truly heal. That I'll always be haunted by what happened." Daniel squeezed her hand. "You don't have to do it alone. And you don't have to have everything figured out. Just take it one day at a time." Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She didn't have to have all the answers. She didn't have to rush through the healing process. She just needed to trust that she was on the right path. As the evening wore on, they continued to talk. The conversation shifted, moving from deep emotional topics to lighter ones. They talked about their favorite books, their childhood memories, their hopes for the future. It was a welcome distraction from the heaviness that had consumed her for so long. But as the night drew to a close, Eleanor knew that the real work was just beginning. The forgiveness she sought, the healing she craved, would not come easily. It would require patience, time, and a willingness to face the parts of herself she had been avoiding. But with Daniel by her side, she felt like she could finally take the first steps toward the life she had always dreamed of. The next few weeks were a blur of emotional breakthroughs and difficult conversations. Eleanor reached out to David, not to reconcile, but to find closure. She told him how his betrayal had shattered her, how his actions had destroyed the trust they had built. But she also told him that she wasn't going to carry the weight of his actions anymore. She was done being his victim. And then, there was Claire. Eleanor hadn't known what to say to her. She hadn't known if she would ever be able to look Claire in the eye again without feeling the sting of betrayal. But she reached out, and when they met, it was a confrontation, not a violent one, but a confrontation of the soul. Eleanor spoke her truth, told Claire how much her betrayal had hurt, but also told her that she didn't want to stay angry anymore. Claire apologized, but it wasn't enough to fix what had been broken. Still, Eleanor felt lighter after their conversation. She didn't forgive Claire entirely, but she realized that forgiveness wasn't always about reconciliation. It was about letting go of the pain, for her own sake. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor slowly began to rebuild her life. She started a new job, one that challenged her and pushed her to grow. She met new people, formed new friendships, and continued to grow emotionally. Daniel remained a steady presence in her life, but Eleanor had begun to realize that the healing she had been seeking wasn't dependent on anyone else. It had to come from within. And, one day, as she stood on her balcony, looking out over the city that had become her new home, she realized that she had finally found the peace she had been searching for. It wasn't perfect. She still had days of doubt, days when the past seemed to creep back into her thoughts. But she was learning to let it go, to live in the present, and to embrace the future. Eleanor had learned the greatest lesson of all, that true healing comes from within, and that the power to change your life lies in your ability to forgive, not just others, but yourself.